Hey guys, it's Ty here. We're back for another video of Start Talking Alabama. Today I'll be talking to a friend of mine who is a long-term survivor of HIV. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you.
Thanks, we're so glad that you could be here today. If you could briefly, just give us a short bio of who you are, where you're from, and how long have you been living with HIV?
Well, my name is Rick. I live just south of here in Shelby County. Have lived in Alabama on and off all my life. Kind of grew up in Michigan, lived in Texas for a while, and Florida for a couple of years, and I always end up back in Alabama for some reason. It keeps pulling me back. I first started getting sick around 2001. And that's when everything really kind of hit with HIV. I was going to a little doc in a box place, and they kept saying, okay, you've got bronchitis. And a visiting doctor came in one day and says, let me send you to a specialist. And the specialist said, may I do an HIV test? And I said, sure. Of course, I knew what the outcome was going to be. But didn't hear anything from him, and then a few months later ended up in the emergency room at a hospital here in Birmingham. And that's when everything just kind of hit the fan, so to speak.
So that first experience of you being in the hospital, that was the first time that you officially knew that you were HIV positive?
It was the first time that I had a, quote, diagnosis, unquote. Like I said, I really wasn't surprised that I was positive. I mean, I'm 62, I'll be 63 this year. And having lived through the onset of this pandemic and living through what I did, I would have been surprised if I wasn't positive.
Interesting. And it's interesting that you speak about, going to a doctor and they're telling you that you have bronchitis or, some other illness. And it's interesting because a lot of times there are diagnoses that are not the right diagnosis. So it is important, even in today, that's a lot of times that is still happening. So it's been really important for people to reach out to people who they feel comfortable with and reach out and, like you said, the specialists. But I'm glad you brought up your age. Is there anything that surprised you about HIV when you were first diagnosed?
Well, it had come a long way because as I mentioned, I lived through the basic onset. I was living in Houston, Texas, and everyone was working hard. And of course, we would hit the happy hour after work and then party on the weekends and have a good time. And then we started noticing faces were disappearing. You didn't know everyone in the bar, but there were faces when you would go out to have a drink after work that you were used to seeing. And you started noticing that those faces were disappearing. And then all of a sudden you had to have a friend who would quit a job, sell a house, and just move. And then that's when we really started hearing about a gay cancer, was what first hit. And then we started hearing about GRID and then AIDS and HIV. But by that time, it was a full-blown pandemic.
And when you noticed the faces disappearing, did you have a slight insight or belief of what could have been happening?
Well, at that time, we didn't know. Because in publications that we had in the bars, we would hear about some gay men in San Francisco and New York that were dying, but they were dying from a gay cancer. And you don't catch cancer. That just does not happen. And so it was not anything that was really on the front burner for anyone. It was, okay, well, it's happening there, it's happening over there, but here I am in the middle of the country There's nothing happening here. And so when you're in a big city and then you stop seeing faces, you go, okay, it's people are leaving, they're moving, they're going to other places, there are other bars, you just stop seeing them. But then it started to happen frequently, and that was when sort of the red flags started to come out. And that's when you really started thinking, okay, maybe there's something else going on here.
So during the pandemic that occurred in the 80s, did you have any friends that you noticed were missing from the bars or your local hangouts? And if you did you believe that they had passed from the disease?
To begin with, no. It was just normal faces, like I said, that I thought I should see, but I had stopped seeing. And then it wasn't any close personal friends, it was friends of friends. And then it started hitting close to home. People that I actually knew. You would see people start to lose weight. And that's when it really started getting strange in the gay community, because you were afraid to ask, are you on a diet? What are you doing? You working out? Questions got stifled. You were afraid to ask anything because you did not really want to know the answer. And after a while, it sort of just exploded. And there was someone that I knew or had talked to and had some type of relationship with that was either dying or had died, sometimes once a week. It was nothing unusual to have a funeral once a week.
Wow, and it's so interesting, just the different eras that we've grown up in. You were around in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and me, coming around in the 90s and the thousands. I've been to a funeral of someone, associate of mine, that I got to know during my HIV work, and it's just, even though we weren't close, it still speaks volumes. But it also gives me strength to continue going forward, continue to trying to empower other people. And is that the same feeling that you kind of shared now, or did it differ when you were, younger?
Yes and no. When I was younger, when I was still living in Houston and everything just really started hitting, you did one of two things. You either became very involved with ACT UP in those types of groups, or you pulled back and you started living in denial. And that was what I did. It was a very comfortable place to be because you weren't having to deal with it. And was busy at work, working on my career. I was in the hospitality industry working for a hotel, for a major hotel chain. And so, yeah, I was extremely busy. And so it was easy to just put it out of my mind and just not deal with it or compartmentalize it.
And looking back on that, they think, well, obviously it was beneficial because, like you said, it was comforting and it was, it was easy to deal with. But do you think that damaged, you as a person?
I don't think it damaged me, but I think it's also the reason I'm on disability today, is because I didn't deal with it soon enough. Well, you would have to understand the gay community during that time, because everybody was afraid. Because to begin with, you didn't know how you got it. You didn't know if it was sex what you did not know. And you would see someone come in, they had lost weight, you could see the crowd part to let them in. And people were just afraid. And I can remember there was two guys that had been together for years that were sort of part of the group that I hang around with. And they were at the gay pride parades every year, and they took videos with the cameras, huge things that were on your shoulders. That was the personal video cameras of the day. And they would take videos of the parades and then put them together with music and everything. Well, they both ended up getting sick. The first one died and lost contact with his partner. And the next time I saw him, I was at my little neighborhood bar having drinks with friends, and he came in, probably weighed 90 pounds, if that. He couldn't walk. He was in a wheelchair. And he was coming in to have one more drink and to be out. And within a week, he was gone. And that was just embedded in my mind what could happen. And that was just one instance. Part of the problem was, too, is so many times we weren't allowed to say goodbye. Because you would look at the obits in the paper, and nobody died of AIDS. Nobody died of it. They died of cancer. There was all sorts of reasons that families put in the papers why their loved one died. And we're talking young men in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. These are young men in the prime of life, everything ahead of them, and they were dying left and right. And many times we weren't even allowed to go to the funerals. So we started having celebrations of life on our own. We would meet at a park. We would meet at a favorite bar. We would all meet somewhere, and we would remember. And we would remember our friends that were leaving. And that just, for me, it made me just internalize just that much more. And like I said, denial can just be such a comfortable place to live.
There was once a time when receiving an HIV diagnosis was considered a death sentence, and we've made tremendous strides now with technology and a lot of HIV prevention services. What are some ways that you have personally overcome your diagnosis to have your physical health now?
I've done sort of a 180. Instead of living in denial, once I got extremely sick and ended up in the hospital, I embraced my HIV. And I educated myself. And I was very lucky. The clinic I go to was very helpful in that. But I taught myself about HIV and what I needed to do to get better. It was strange. Before, I wanted to never think about it, but then once I got to a certain point, I decided, okay, this is not going to get the best of me. This is not going to kill me. I'm not going to die. And I'm going to go on. And so I just embraced it. And I took my health care into my hands and became very active in my health care. And that's what has really gotten me through to where I am today. I embraced my own health care.
Absolutely. So if you were looking back at your first initial point of diagnosis to where you are now, did you think back then that you would be able to live the life that you're currently living now?
I wasn't thinking that far ahead because at the time I was extremely sick. I was diagnosed with PCP, pneumocystis pneumonia, and I was extremely sick and spent most of that summer in the hospital. Ended up in ICU 2 or 3 times. There was a couple of times that my doctors had the family come in because they weren't sure if I was going to make it through the night. But at that point, I was just too stubborn to die. I mean, it wasn't going to happen to me. I was going to make it. And so death was never there for me. I wasn't going to let that get to me. Death wasn't going to embrace me. I was going to embrace life. And I think that's what helped me. My whole attitude about HIV just completely changed. And that's, I think, the reason I made it through and what's helped me to get to where I am today.
As you were learning more about HIV and embracing your status and your diagnosis, did that give you a sense of pride to be someone who's living with HIV?
It empowered me. But one thing I have to say that really put me on the path where I am today was one of my health caregivers, my nurse, who is now my nurse practitioner. Probably 11 years ago, I got a letter from her. She sent me a letter through the mail and said, we have this group at the clinic called the PAB, a Patient Advisory Board. It's a group of people who are HIV positive, and we act as hosts at the clinic in the waiting room. We do education through learn and lunches, and basically make sure that new patients coming into the clinic know about our clinic and its services. And she said, I think you would be a good fit for this. And so I thought about it, and I knew that she wouldn't steer me wrong because love her to death. And I attended my first meeting, and I was in a room full of people, and everyone was in the same boat that I was. They were all HIV positive. And seeing the smiles and talking to different people and getting to know them, and they had stories and journeys very similar to mine. And that's was really sort of when it clicked. And I figured out, okay, this is where I need to be. This is what I need to do to make sure that I get through where I want to go. This is where I start. And then it's bloomed from there.
I can definitely agree with you. Even with these Start Talking Alabama videos, that's one of the most important parts for me, is actually talking to people and interacting and building that sense of community. But even with all of this hard work and prevention services, we're still seeing an alarming rate of new diagnosis, especially in Alabama. What do you think that's from?
Part of it is stigma. Because, yes, we are in the South. We are in the Bible Belt. And there's still a lot of ignorance about HIV. There's a lot of people out there who still think of HIV and they think of 1980. They're not thinking of 2016 or 2017. That's not on their purview. But then there's also people out there, the younger people, who did not see the start of this pandemic and what happens to people that are not getting treated. And they just think, okay, well, I'm not worried about it because I'll just take a pill and I'll be good. And so it's not even, they don't even think about it. It's like diabetes. Oh, if I got diabetes, I'll just go take a pill and everything's okay. Some people think, oh, there's a cure. We don't get out and talk to people today, whether it's coming from Hollywood or it's coming from our government or just communities and churches and bars and things like that. We don't talk about it now like we did in the 80s and the 90s. We've got where we just kind of sit back because we have come so far in such a short amount of time, relatively, that I think sometimes that we've fallen down on what we need to do to make sure that people understand this is still a disease that this is a virus that can kill you and will kill you. It doesn't care about you. It doesn't care whether you're black, white, male, female, does not matter. It does not care. Its only purpose is to find a place so it can replicate. And if you're not careful, you're it. And it doesn't care. And we've still got a lot of work to do to let people know, yes, it's still out there. No, this isn't cured. Yes, we can make sure that you live a long life, but you will still be HIV positive.
One of the topics that we've discussed on our videos is PrEP. So even with PrEP, and I'll share a story. A friend of mine is a nurse. She's an STD nurse. And she had a client come in and she was telling him about PrEP and sharing information. He was like, yeah, well, I'm on PrEP, but something's still not right. So she screened him, and I believe he had an STI or another STD. And so they were sitting down, she was going over post-test counseling, and he said, well, at least it's not HIV. And, that is kind of at the point where we are now because we have transcended so much with this new technology. People are now saying, well, at least it's not HIV. If it is going to be something, I would rather it be something that can be cured, or I can take a shot or take a pill for it. So that, I agree with you 100% that people in my age range have not seen the beginning of the pandemic, have not gone to a funeral a week. They have not seen, people on their deathbed. There are people who have gone through those experiences, but like you said, it's not in comparison to the pandemic that was going on during the 80s. Mm-hmm. Now, I want to ask you, are you worried about getting older and living with HIV?
Yes, I am. That's something that I think about every day. I'm worried about the effects of long-term antiretroviral use because we don't know what it's going to do. I mean, I have been on it for 17 years. There's people that I know who've been on it for 20, 25, some 30 years. We don't know what it's going to do. We know it increases the aging process. It doesn't get rid of the inflammation that goes on in our bodies, and so that's continuing to go on. I mean, we will have an undetectable viral load. We have healthy CD4 counts, but there's still inflammation. There's still a lot going on in our bodies that we don't know about. And so, yes, this is something that I'm still worried about. And it's not just the HIV. It's once you get to a certain point in life, especially at my age, I also realize that there's many things that happened to me and things that I went through in the 80s that I have not dealt with yet. Like, how did I make it? Why am I still here when I lost so many friends and people that I knew? Why am I here? Why did I make it? Why did I not die when they did? Especially since I did not do anything about it. I just kind of sat back and just let things take its natural course. I still did not die. Why did that happen? There's things, there's triggers. It's strange to hear so many people say, oh, I hear this song and I can remember back when I was young and I was dancing and I remember where I was when I heard this song and who I was dancing with and where I was. And so many times I'll hear a song that brings back those memories for me. And the person that where I remember it from and the people I was with, they're gone. It's just, I think it's survivor's guilt. And I think a lot of us that have made it through are having to suddenly, once we get to this age, we're having to start figuring out how to deal with that. Because we weren't supposed to get here. Those of us who went through the 80s and the early 90s, we weren't supposed to be here. We were supposed to die like the other people at the beginning. And we're still trying to figure out how to put our feet, how to continue this journey of life and trying to figure out why we are here, why we made it through. And that's hard. It's hard.
Dealing with grief and the loss of loved ones, how high of a correlation do you think there is between sexual health and mental health?
I think it goes hand in hand. Because if the mental health is not there, you don't care about the other one. There's a real correlation between the two. They go together like a hand in glove. Because without one, you don't have the other. And I don't see someone making it through to the other side unless, if your mental health is not there, if you don't have it or you don't recognize what's happening and find some help somehow, somewhere, whether it's a peer, a loved one, or a professional, you're not going to care about the sexual health. But then if you do that, you're not going to care about someone else's sexual health because you're just not going to care, which is frightening.
Thank you, Rick, for joining our conversation and sharing your life experiences. And to the viewers out there, I want to remind you to be honest, be transparent, and love the skin that you're in. If you're in need of services or other educational tools, visit our website at adph.org. And remember, start talking Alabama.